It's these Windows-based systems. Just don't get them. All right. To paraphrase a song called Yellow Taxi by Joni Mitchell in 1980, you don't know what you've got till it's gone. One of the best ways to understand reputational value is to recognize how valuable it is when you lose it. All right. So there are great examples of reputational loss, this consequence of intangible asset value monetization, in the technology space through the creation and protection of innovation, in food and toys through safety and quality, through transportation and hospitality through security matters and service, in the industrial and manufacturing space through questions of ethics, and in retail through the question of sustainability. So the lineup, if you will, please. We had a mention of salmonella in peanut butter. Salmonella is generally not a preferred ingredient of a peanut butter product. And you recall that Kellogg's, perhaps a month ago, the CEO of Kellogg's, David McKay, had to testify in front of Senator Henry Waxman and explain to him why Kellogg's didn't actually look into great detail on where they bought their peanut butter, relying merely on the effectiveness of the overall supply chain. In contrast to Nestle, which said they very carefully monitor their supply chain, and that is why they did not have a salmonella issue in their peanut butter. Mattel, one of the greatest producers of children's toys, had an issue with lead paint on Barbie, so-called toxic Barbie, which may have led ultimately to the toxic assets program. The Marriott Hotels has been a favorite hotel for terrorists and has had more bombings than any other hotel chain, which leads to a whole host of jokes not appropriate for the morning. JetBlue Airline was one of the great U.S. carriers until on Valentine's Day 2 years ago, they trapped all their passengers on aircraft because the computer systems failed. And over the course of a few hours, with the failure of their information technology systems, were unable to document where their aircraft were, where their passengers were, where their flight crews were, and therefore froze everything in its place. They actually had to reboot the entire airline, which took 3 days and cost them almost all of their market cap. Siemens had Siemens had a recent ethical issue that cost approximately $1.3 billion in fines, and Walmart, as you know, has a perennial issue with labor. The poster child for reputation management is Johnson & Johnson. Now, this is often taught as a case study in superior public relations. I will argue that public relations is a necessary, but certainly not a sufficient element of superior intangible asset management. Let's look at the case study from a financial perspective. In 1982, some bottles of Tylenol were contaminated with arsenicals. And some people who bought Tylenol off the shelf in a suburb of Illinois, outside of Chicago, died. You will see by the blue arrow on the right side of the screen that there was a huge flurry in stock trading activity, and over the short course, the blue line representing the market value of Johnson & Johnson precipitously dropped. Because at that time, Johnson & Johnson could not assure any of its stakeholders that it had any idea what was going on. It could not provide assurances that it was in control of its business. It was in control of its innovation, it was in control of its processing, it was in control of its distribution, nor was it in control of the content within its bottles. That's all physical stuff that relates to the intangible of confidence and safety and security in the product the company ultimately was selling. And as you can see, the company lost a significant amount of value. Fast forward to 1986, there was another poisoning, this time in Brooklyn, involving the same poison in the same bottle of the same stuff. And you will see, as shown in the arrow on the left side, another flurry of trading activity as investors began to panic as a consequence of this event. But at that time, Johnson & Johnson, whose stock price is again shown in blue, was able to assure all of its stakeholders that it was in control. It now had sealed systems on its bottles. It had labeling on all the manufacturing processes. And Johnson & Johnson could convince its customers, its vendors, its investors, and the regulators that it knew what was going on and that poisoning was isolated to a single bottle on a single shelf. It could isolate the problem. And that, if you will, is the whole message of superior intangible asset management, is being able to isolate a problem when it arises and therefore assure the firm of resilience. In this instance, Johnson & Johnson outperformed the S&P And as recently as last month, Johnson & Johnson was ranked by the Harris poll and by the Reputational Institute, which publishes in Forbes magazine, as being the #1 most reputable firm in the world. So let's focus on 6 reasons why a good reputation is valued and why this presentation on intangible assets is hovering closely to the concepts of reputation. Reputation is defined in the psychology literature as the expectation for future behavior, the expected impact on cash flow and demand. That is, customers will be motivated and will purchase and will pay a premium. Employees will be attracted and will accept lower pay and other non-cash compensation, the aura of working for a great firm. Vendors will offer superior terms, and internal operations will operate with less friction, less litigation, less lawsuits, less unionization, less friction. All of these then have impact on enterprise value and bottom line. The bottom line then, in the context of investors' expectations through the price-earnings multiple, will bid up enterprise value. And the uniformity of these expectations, which is a product of superior communications, corporate communications, public relations, marketing in general, will lead to reduced volatility, lower betas, and lower cost of credits, higher credit quality. These are all exceedingly important because they are linked to the most important driver of corporate behavior, which is executive compensation. Stock price is forward-looking. Most executive compensation is linked, that is, equity-linked compensation is forward-looking. Cash-based bonuses are affected by stakeholders' expectations. So the executives who run the businesses depend on a compensation platform that is closely linked to expectations and which is closely driven by reputation. And that is the virtuous circle on why reputation management is so valued and so valuable. Let's take an innovation example. RIM, the producer of the ubiquitous BlackBerry. Who here has a BlackBerry on their hip, purse, or other body part right now? Thank you. And it's all silent, right? Right. Good. All right. Late 2001, a patent holding company, NTP, 2001, 8 years ago, sued RIM for patent infringement. For the next 6 or 7 years, RIM's stock price did not move because of the risk associated with the loss of the asset. Remember, asset is something you control on which you expect economic return or cash flows. If there is a question on the legal ownership through patent infringement, then the ownership aspect of asset is at risk. Cash flows maybe, the BlackBerries were selling, but the control of that cash flow was at risk. RIM's price, as shown in this stock chart, which about mid-position is 2007, is flat for 6 years, no equity appreciation. In March 2006, RIM signs on 620,000 new subscribers, still missing their target. Stock price drops 6%. At that time, they finally agreed to settle with NTP and wrote them a check for about two-thirds of $1 billion. Two-thirds of $1 billion was the settlement. That released the price. From there on, stock price begins to jump. Now that two-thirds of $1 billion is off the table and committed, there is no longer uncertainty. Risk is removed, and the value associated with this innovation is now appreciated, and the story goes forward from here, as you all know. At least those of you who are not carrying iPhones, where you know there's a premium associated with that device.